Hey everybody, this is Avi Abelo from IsraelOnWire.com. Today there is the annual commemoration in Hebron, in the ancient and holy city of Hebron, that Avraham, our first forefather, purchased property there, right? The first recollection of property being bought by Jews in the land of Israel, in Hebron, documented in the Bible. So today there is a special commemoration for the 90th anniversary of the horrific massacre of the Jewish community of Hebron by their Muslim Arab neighbors 90 years ago, 1929, Morot Tarpat in Hebrew. For those of you who are not familiar with the details, just very quickly, again, 1929, the state of Israel has not been established. Israel did not liberate Judea and Samaria. There were no settlements, right? None of these reasons that today's Israel haters use for the terror against us, for all the delegitimization against us, as if everything is our fault because we have our own country, because we liberated our homeland in Judea and Samaria. This is 1929. They murdered us across the country, not just in Hebron. Just the worst massacre was in Hebron. The leader of the Muslims, the local Muslims at the time, again, they were not called Palestinians. In 1929, it was the Jews who were called Palestinians. So the leader of the local Muslims was Haj Amin al-Husseini, Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was Yasser Arafat, the arch-terrorist, his uncle. Right, he started all this anti-Israel, anti-Jew hatred and killing in the streets here in Israel in 1929. He basically said something we hear today. The Jews were destroying Al-Aqsa, right? And he used that to incite the Arab-Muslim mob in Israel, in the land of Israel, before pre-state Israel, to rampage, have pogroms, kill Jews in the streets all across the country. Not just in Hebron, but in Jerusalem, in Jaffa, in Haifa, in Tiberia. Local Arab Muslims are just running through the streets and killing and beating their neighbors, fellow Jews. And it was in Hebron where it was the worst. 67 Jews brutally murdered in their homes, running and chasing them in the streets. Now, I'm going to leave you with two very important stories, eyewitness incidents from that massacre that should teach us everything we need to know in order to live here in the Middle East with our Arab Muslim neighbors. Without understanding the message of these two stories, we are in the dark. We are like living in the dark ages, ignoring the reality of living in the Middle East. And what the Middle East is of what the tribal Muslim culture is here in the Middle East. And we cannot achieve a peaceful future without internalizing these lessons. Now, these stories are eyewitness accounts written by Rav Dov Cohen. To Rise Above is the name of the book in English. He was a young yeshiva student in Hebron in 1929. He survived the massacre, and he writes about, part of this book is about him living in Hebron, the life of the Jews in Hebron, and then about the massacre, and then the rest of his life, right? It's a really thick book. It's about his whole life. Get your hands on this book, To Rise Above, The Amazing Life of Harav Dov Cohen. Here are the two stories that tell us everything we need to know about living in the Middle East. Story number one. First of all, the Jewish community in Hebron has been living there since Second Temple times, right? Even though the Romans exiled most of the Jews, majority of the Jews from the land of Israel, there were some that remained. Some remained in Hebron and lived there until 1929 and lived peacefully with their Arab Muslim neighbors, those who came later to live with them, right? Because the Arabs only came to Israel in the 7th century, the first ones. That was the conquest of the Muslims in the 7th century. That means the Jews were living there already 700 years around since the destruction of the Second Temple and before. Okay, so Jews were living there for 1,000+ years, and only then did the Arabs come, and they were living together until 1929. There's the story of the baker. The Jewish baker in Hebron. His main employee, again, this is in the book, documented by Rav Dov HaKohen about his life. He knew this baker personally. His main employee was a local Arab Muslim. And they lived together, they worked together, they celebrated family events together. The day of the massacre arrived. And when the Muslims all over the land of Israel were incited by Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini to do pogroms and create violence and murder Jews, and one of the Jews who were murdered was the Jewish baker. And he was murdered by his employee, the Arab Muslim who worked with him day and night, that they went to each other's family events. That is the person who murdered him. And he didn't just murder him, he cut off his head and put it in the baker's oven. Is that something you expect by someone who knows you, who works with you, who shares family events together with you? No, that doesn't make sense to the rational Western mind. But that does make sense in the tribal clan Islam culture of the Middle East, where there is a deep hatred inside, or a deep understanding that you are supposed to be the master, and if someone else is on top of you, not the master, so you wait until the day you have a chance and you're strong enough to then kill your master. And that's what this local Arab Muslim did to his boss, to the Jewish baker. He murdered him violently, beheading him and putting his head in the oven. Again, documented by someone who was there, Rav Dov HaKohen, who lived there. He was a student there at the time. That's story number one. Story number two. This man, Rav Dov HaKohen, as a student, he was part of a whole bunch of people who were hiding out in a Jewish home. I think it was one of the leaders of the Jewish community. It was Shabbat. They were there to eat Shabbat lunch, and they were there when all of a sudden the Arabs were banging on the doors to come in. They heard what the massacre was going on. They understood they needed to hide. He and a few other students, they snuck out of the home of the Jew that they were in into the neighbor's home to an Arab Muslim home. They snuck into the home, and this Arab Muslim allowed them to hide in his home. Then the mob of Arab Muslims were bashing down on the door of the Arab Muslim neighbor whose house Rav Dov Yosef was hiding. And the Arab Muslim host said to the mob, "You can't touch them. They're in my home, and they have my protection because they're hiding in my home." Now, this story is so critical. Put the two stories together. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to our Western rational minds. On the first hand, the first story, wait, they know each other, they work together, family events together. Makes no sense that the baker's helper, his employee, should massacre his boss who he worked with day and night, and they knew each other intimately. And yet, if there is a hatred there, then how did the host allow Rav Dov Yosef and his fellow students to survive hidden in his house? And it all comes down to this. The culture of the Middle East is tribal. It's a different culture. It's not the culture of Judeo-Christian values of the Western world. It is a different culture. It has different mores. One part of that culture is, yes, the tribe is above all. And anyone who is out to get, anyone you're out to get, so long as you're able to. If they are stronger than you, then you lay in waiting until you can overcome them. That's part of the tribal culture of the Middle East. On the other hand, a tribal norm is your house is a protection. Anyone who's in your house, you protect, even if it's someone who you're against. But as long as they're in your house, you protect them. Folks, we know everything we need to know about the Middle East from those two stories to understand why there is no peace today, why the Western world is not going to have peace with the Muslim world, because they don't understand the tribal culture of the Middle East and the culture of Islam. Not all Muslims are like this. Many Muslims escaped the Middle East and ran away to Europe and North America and Australia to run away from the evils of that tribal culture and enjoy the freedoms and equality of the Western world. But the so-called progressive leftists, they call themselves liberals, but they're not, are causing the most harm to those Muslims, freedom-loving Muslims who ran away from the evils of the tribal culture of the Middle East to enjoy the freedoms of the West by screaming out Islamophobia and disregarding the realities of Muslim culture. Folks, the way to live peacefully with our Arab Muslim neighbors is for the Jews to be in charge, not look weak. Let them know they can't take any land away from us. They can't get away with killing us and murdering us. They shouldn't get college degrees when they're in jail. They shouldn't be allowed telephones in jail. They shouldn't be allowed family visits in jail. Their families should be expelled. Their homes should be destroyed for the terror and the murder that they do. Their imams should be expelled for inciting to murder. That's how you deal with the tribal culture of the Middle East. Because it's not about understanding one another. The Jewish baker of Hebron and his Arab Muslim worker, they understood each other, they worked together, they loved each other, they went to each other's family events. That did not prevent his employee from murdering his boss, the Jewish baker. People have to wake up. The Middle East is not Kansas. And it's so funny because the leftists today, they scream in Israel that we're occupiers. First of all, you can't occupy your own land, and this is Jewish land from time immemorial. But the true occupiers today, the true colonialists, are the left. Because they might not physically be being in places, but they are culturally colonializing the Middle East. They are using their Western mores and understandings of life and imposing it upon the Middle East on a culture that they do not understand, they don't want to understand, and that they disregard and ignore and bring havoc and danger to the whole freedom-loving world because of that ignorance. That is cultural colonialization by people in the West who repudiate their past colonial activities. We have to bring a stop to that. Help me bring a stop to this by sharing these stories of the Hebron massacre 90 years ago. We know everything that we need to know about how to deal with our Arab Muslim neighbors. And I'm telling you, we can live peacefully with those Arab Muslims who want to live in peace with us, as long as Israel is in charge. They know it's our land. They can never take it away from us. They can't get away with murdering us. As long as they know that, we'll be able to live peacefully with them. But it's when we are weak, as we are today, and not just in Judea and Samaria, but not enforcing the law equally against Arab land grabs and violence and crime in the Negev and in the Galil and in Jaffa and throughout Jerusalem. They know we're weak because we're afraid of them. And that's why they know they can get away with murdering us and thinking they can steal our land away from us. So the answer is simple. Israel, be as strong as possible. It's our land. We apply sovereignty everywhere as possible. Those Arab Muslims who want to live peacefully with us can live peacefully with us. Those who don't, they're expelled, or they go to live in other countries because they don't want to. Because they show they don't want to live peacefully with us. I'm not worried about a demographic issue. That's a totally different video. It's all taken care of. There's always going to be a Jewish majority here with those Arab Muslims who want to live peacefully with us. Okay? Anyway, we need everything we need to know from the Hebron massacre of 90 years ago. Let's learn the lessons. Please share this information with everyone. Thanks everyone for watching. If this was important and you believe this is important, please share, and let's bring a better future by truly understanding reality by learning from the past. Shalom from the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, the Judea and Samaria, the homeland of the Jewish people here in Israel.